Welcome to Fontribute, where we talk about fonts and their attributes. Fontribute. It's Thomas rolling solo today. So we've been gone for a couple of weeks because we've been prototyping a new part of the series for Fontribute called, not really having a name, but basically we've been exploring type in a really atomic level at the particular font design perspective and doing comparisons between two different typefaces to help increase your distillment and understanding of type design and typography in general. Now, the thing is, there's always a big step between learning how to look at type on the atomic level and how it gets applied. So for this new series or new season of Fontribute, we can call it this way, what we're going to do is review how type is being used in websites. So if I go through a quick slide deck to show you, we're going to be viewing a website, Printworks. It's a venue in London, I believe, for printing. So what I'm doing is reviewing the mobile experience to the desktop experience, by exploring how type and typography is laid out. We can learn more about how you can be better at your typography yourself by doing so. So, with that said, let's jump right into it. But this is a beta test, so apologies if I'm a little loosey-goosey with this one. But let me know in the comments below if you're enjoying this kind of project and want to have more explorations like this. So let's just get started with generally what we're seeing across, both the mobile and the desktop experience. I try to lock up the similar content so we can just do a general analysis between the two. Let's start with some basic points. Well, first things we could say, one is a position of navigation, right? So obviously that's not changing. However, positioning is changing, but in an interesting way. Notice that the first three are grouped together: menu, subscribe, and venue hire. Buy tickets is in place in a separate positioning. Now, the degree of difference, as you can tell, is very significant. On the desktop experience, we're seeing a huge positioning. It looks like it appears that the first three content is moved all the way to the left side, and the buy tickets is put on the right side. This is repeated in the mobile experience, but notice the gap difference has changed. But yet there is still a difference in position. This space over here is larger than the spaces here and here. So net overall, there's a sense of grouping that's occurring or implied by just those positions. Next up, we can see is, I think a very particular interesting note is, notice there's a logo reference, very explicit. And I think I recall seeing this from Brand New, the discussion about this logo mark, logo type for Printworks. And I thought it was very successful. I think it's a really fun exploration of implying typographic form and how the printing process occurs. Notice its conspicuous absence in the mobile experience. It appears to be the distinction of hierarchy and priority, that the logo was not a relevant point in the mobile experience, and that was removed. What is interesting, the next move down the type selection is this DJ Cozy Knock Knock album launch. You can see that they're locked up in similar position, and they appear to have similar relationships in their leading between the two. Besides size, while the sizes are different, the leading relationships felt the same or scaled proportionally down. You can also notice that in the desktop experience, this basically in a column split. This is basically two sections right here and right here. We notice in the secondary section, the date, time, and cost is a section, and a call to action by the tickets is below. Notice that in the mobile experience, again, there's been kind of a stacking effect occurred in the sense that no longer left and right. This is above, this is below. I thought was interesting was also to see was, because this is a kind of a carousel movement of different content. In the desktop experience, the position, these kind of move forward and move backward arrows are positioned at the very far left and right of the page. In the mobile experience, they've been positioned next to the date, cost, and time information below. You can't see because on the screen, but the buy ticket has instead of being much smaller in hierarchy and proportion, in the desktop experience has been scaled much larger and given a whole section below. That's what this little section over here is indicating. So back to just general positioning. How is the spacing relationships working with each other? I think it's interesting to know. Oh, hi. That was not what I expected to happen. Pardon me. Zoom in. Wow. So I apologize. As you can tell, it's still a beta, working things through. I don't know why it zoomed out crazy like that. Okay. So trying to. Nope, that is not what I want. Ah, disaster. Apologies, guys. Fun times. Okay. So I do find it interesting to note, again, the detail and positioning. Notice that the relationship of these margin setups versus this margin setup. There's an implied feeling, especially we look over here, that the navigation content's closer to the image as opposed to the furthest edge of the screen, as you can see here. I appreciate those little details. It gives a sense of cohesion that this navigation bar section is meant to be pulling down to here, as opposed to being separate from, really distinct from the other pieces of content. I also appreciate an interesting move of cropping. Notice that the artwork, the photography in the mobile crops here, and the decision instead of aligning the headline copy directly to it, it appears looks like this is 2/3 about aligned. It's actually right around the crossbar of the H position, I believe, or slightly around that range. I think that's a very nice move. I think it gives a kind of non-boxy feeling between the content, the image, and the type as well. Also, in the desktop experience, we can also say, take notice that generally, I apologize, I'm bouncing around. Let me first say in the mobile experience that the size relationships have been reduced in extremity. There's obviously a size difference between these elements, but the degree of change of scale is not as high as compared to the mobile desktop experience. So, I mean, what I mean by this is, let's say this is 5 in size, and this is a 1. Let's say consider this was a 1. This is probably a 3, right? Just the degree of the degree of change, the contrast of size is not as extreme in the mobile experience as it is in the desktop experience, and I appreciate that. Allows us to take note that there's additional content that was not placed, but yet in the mobile experience, but yet it's still speaking to some of the vocabulary we're seeing in the mobile. Notice I said out before, this headline's cropped, not kind of going off the edge of the photography as we see here. Notice a similar decision for this. Looks like a calendar appears from the screen where there's the date, the day, and the month in particular. So notice the consistency of some design decisions across the different user experiences or screen experiences. Okay, with that out of the way, let's move on to another section. So I scrolled down to show the date section because one in the desktop experience, you saw that these dates were permanent. I scrolled down to show how they manage their content hierarchy, and likewise in the mobile experience. So immediately the first thing you should notice is in the desktop experience, it's these clear appears to be a 4-column setup, how the content spread out versus a 2-column spread in the mobile experience. The date has been given a whole column by itself and positioned on the top, while the secondary information has been all placed in the second column in the mobile experience. Meanwhile, in the desktop experience, everything's been positioned within the one column. So that's an interesting decision of change in composition from the desktop to the mobile. There's apparently also a decision of hierarchy of color in terms of values. Notice the grayness. I want to be fair to the designers of this website. These grays were much lighter in color than in the screenshot is giving you the impression. But we can definitely see a grayer text, what appears to be appears to be repetitious in terms of it says it's Friday, it's on this date, this is the cost, and this is the last entry. I guess I appears the designers believe this is redundant information and therefore not the highest priority. So therefore it was grayed out. Well, this is more prominent. Looks like it appears to be the performers. and the call to actions to either get more information or buy tickets. And then it's another, again, what appears to be secondary, the view on Facebook call to action on both pieces of content. It appears that these particular content strings are the same size. I cannot confirm that 100% yet. I have to check their font sizes to verify that. But what is definitely true, I can say that there's been, again, a larger contrast. Notice that this was a 3, and this is a 1, this is a 1, this is a 2. The difference between the sizing relationships has been reduced in the mobile experience. We can say that. Okay, so moving on to the next section. So this appears to be a kind of a about section. And what I wanted to do here was actually show that, this in the desktop experience, it scrolls down just to show a demonstration of that, to show the same piece of the content. What a fun note, I actually did investigate this before we started recording, was that the text face being used, Graphik, is a lighter weight in the desktop experience than in the mobile experience. I just want to take a second to show appreciation of that. I thought that was a really nice move by the design team to understand that in a mobile experience, the lighter weight of Graphik may not have been appropriate for the size relationships, and they opted for a heavier weight in the mobile experience for their text weight versus the desktop experience. I appreciated that. I just want to take note, just as a preamble, because it's one of the things I investigated before this recording. Now, on this particulars, what we're seeing here, one thing we can see is we've reverted to a white background, right? So for other pages, it was this black background throughout the whole content. In this page, there's a clear delineation of content and navigation. In this case, I think another reason why this negative space relationship, especially in the mobile, I thought was really important, was to help identify what's associated to what. Notice the rapid change in scale. Notice how small relatively this on the mobile experience this header is versus this much larger size, and positioning. Notice it's rotated, it's been transformed to sit. Looks like it's been rotated 90 degrees, and its alignment has been changed. Notice the alignment was basically was solid on the ends for new. Notice now they've solid alignment on alignment this way. So instead of a left alignment, it looks like it changed to a right alignment, and they rotated the text. I thought that was an interesting design decision in this composition for the desktop experience. And likewise, along the way, it looks like they've cropped the photo in the desktop and the mobile experience be much more in this relationship ratio versus a much longer ratio, long and narrow. I think, is this like a 16:19 ratio? Don't quote me on that, but I think it might be a 16:19 ratio versus a more kind of 3:4 ratio in the mobile experience. I appreciate those kind of details. And it appears they decided to focus on the main focal point of the content in the photograph, which is this perspective shot. And even though they cropped it basically in the mobile experience. It appears also that the measure of the body copy, besides the text weight, has been changed to deal with the mobile experience versus the desktop experience. But also, when I mean by measure, I mean notice where this line break happens. Multi gets a hyphenated purpose, and changing the, just compare that to what's going on in over here, multi-purpose. So the multi here was a line break here, and the line break for face was over here. So take notice that look, it appears that the measure has been changed between the two as well. This could be a combination of font, of font size, the font style being used, and the margin relationships. So if I guesstimate where the margin is, say it's here to here, then the margin probably here. Although the line break is over here, so they probably did a margin. Yeah, so probably they made it equal or close to it both on these sides. Let's compare that to this example. Notice that it appears that a much wider margin was decided in the desktop experience versus the mobile experience. So that's another variation we're seeing between the two design directions. So it looks like they pumped up the type size, and even with the smaller margin, the decision was made that this was adequate, or this was a reasonable measure for the typesetting in the mobile experience versus the desktop. Okay. So the last section, I believe, is my last, almost second to last section. We're going to talk about navigation. Notice that if you go back to the other slides to show you, there's a menu, right? It doesn't list. It basically just has just a call for menu on the navigation. When you actually get to click it, you get a similar experience in the mobile and the desktop experiences. What's happened is we have a flush left. Looks like it appears to be this this flat-sided sans serif. I think it's Druk. We'll talk about that in a second. Been flush left and actually cropped. It's actually cropping, so it appears to be a negative margin decision on this navigation bar. All caps with a very relatively tight alignment. We can see this because of the FAQ. And they appear to be treated in a similar relationship. This like font, basically the font size has been scaled down. But besides that, the relationships of the leading to the font size have been made the same or remain consistent. It also appears that this has been made consistent across their forms. However, there's been a little tomfoolery going on with the overlap issue. I think that's solved in the desktop when you scroll down. You can scroll down and click on it, and there won't be an overlap conflict per se. But take notice of that. Also, what's interesting to note is in the mobile experience, there's a pretty prominent amount of negative space decided, while in the desktop experience, this negative space has been not as prominent. I think basically they kept it at a certain ratio. This navigation pull out section to be the same, but because the font size decreased in the mobile experience, this was decided to keep it just a larger negative space. Okay, so let's lead to what typeface we were seeing, because there were two typefaces being used. It was Druk and Graphik, which I have both here and here. So they're both from the same foundry, a commercial type, which is a smart move. Generally, it's a good idea using typeface from the same foundry. There's a good chance they will play well with each other, or the same designs we're thinking about it, and there's some kind of harmonious relationship between the two. So it's a reasonable move. In general, we can definitely say that Graphik is used for those really bold, impactful headers. Been used predominantly in their uppercase format. If we double check, I believe in almost all the cases where we see Druk, it's almost all in its uppercase format. Yeah, that's what I'm seeing so far. So if I roll back, all in the uppercase form, which I feel it tends to be the case. Usually in these kind of condensed sans serifs, their real magic is in their cap forms, lowercase forms. They exist, but I could see these designers were really using this cap form really effectively. And it tends to do well because of how condensed it is to be really tightly leaded. We noticed that as well. Notice the tight leading relationships, navigation. We can even see it here in this section right here. So there's a appropriateness of tight leading with a more condensed, narrow design. And usually being narrow and condensed tends to give a propensity to be bolder. So it kind of all speaks together. Its flat sidedness again helps speak to the kind of ability to be compactful and efficient in space, as we saw again, and kind of like raw efficiency, kind of like a commercial mechanical process. So again, that's the tone I'm feeling. The tone you're seemingly getting from this in this header is this kind of bluntness, efficiency, directness tone, and this kind of flat-sidedness energy really speaks to that vocabulary. So that was, but then to pair that with Graphik, I thought was interesting. Graphik, if I remember correctly, is a interpretation of this kind of the neo-grotesques, like accented grotesques, and forms like that. So, but notice it's generally looser spacing, right? So it seems to actually have a good tendency to work in text settings. I think that's why they chose this as their text font for the usage. It It speaks to some of the vocabulary of, again, a sans serif, but this is a much more softer, warmer feeling. What gives those propensities, I think, is the nature of its rounds. Its rounds feel very circular. There's a degree of contrast I'm sensing between them that's not too extreme, but very warm in their approach. I think it's how the curves are handling it. So I speak much more in detail about this uh, in the Fontribute episode about Graphik, but I just want to give a quick rundown of what I thought made this give the tone and feeling I got from it. But generally, I think it's how it treats its round and straights, its looseness of spacing, and how these curves are related seem to give this a kind of warmer, uh, approachable feeling that when I see it in text settings, it has a kind of polish and it has a sense of polish and intentionality we expect from grotesque sans serifs, but with a kind of warmth and a not. It's not staid. It doesn't have that kind of weird tone Helvetica does, where it has like it's Helvetica, and it's kind of staid and kind of soggy in its approach. I know I'm using these weird adjectives that aren't described. The problem with scaling out is I can't go back to zooming in very effectively on the details. So I encourage you to check out the Graphik Fontribute episode where we really get into detail for Graphik in general. I actually think it was compared to a flat-sided sans serif. I think it was Cooper Hewitt, I believe. So actually, it's a very appropriate comparison of the two and how they relate to each other. So with that said, that covers this episode of Fontribute. I really hope this was helpful for you and your exploration of how type is used and how the type choices you make imply the tone and voice for your project. This is a beta, so obviously I'd love to hear feedback if I can make this better and more effective. If there were points that were confusing or I could have done a better job clarifying, love to hear it. I really would appreciate it. And I want to make sure that this is educational and useful for everyone listening. Thank you all for your time, and I hope you all have a great week. Take care.